I left IBM, International Business Machines, to chase a dream of building something on my own. But the person who was supposed to support me turned out to be the one eyeing the core technology I alone had created. I'm Nathan Cole, 36 years old. I've never chased wealth. The only thing I've ever cared about is building a system smart enough to make cyber attacks think twice before they even begin. I called it Aegis Core, the shield. The idea came to me during a sleepless night after reading about how a rogue bot accidentally stopped a $3 billion hack. I thought, if a random glitch could save a system, what if we designed an AI that actually understands when a network is under threat and knows exactly how to respond? That thought stayed with me for years. And then I met Derek Sloan. He showed up at a tech conference in Austin, CEO of Helix Fort, a Series B startup developing enterprise-level security software. Helix Fort doesn't need rule followers, he said. We need people who break the mold. I want you to build a system that makes every hacker out there afraid to even try. Derek promised full autonomy, complete control over the architecture, and a hand-picked engineering team. I should have been suspicious, but after years of suffocating bureaucracy at a global corporation, his offer felt like freedom. I brought with me the early sketches of Aegis Core and 12 years of experience, ready to start fresh. I spent 20 months building it. No weekends, no holidays. I poured everything into creating an AI that didn't just analyze behavior, it could interpret intent, a system capable of detecting threats long before an attacker ever touched the firewall. And if needed, it could isolate, patch, and restore the network in seconds. Practically an immune system for the digital world. Then just as Aegis Core hit its first stable release, just as it blocked a simulated attack that no one had ever been able to stop, Derek started visiting the lab more often. Man, watching it run feels like Iron Man in real life, he joked, eyes skimming a financial report. The board's ecstatic. You're kind of a miracle, Nathan. When Aegis Core passed its final simulation, for the first time intercepting a zero-pattern attack without a single line of human input, I knew I had just done something the cybersecurity industry had only theorized about for over a decade. I messaged Derek right away. Friday, 2 p.m.? Yes, come in, he replied. I arrived at the meeting with data, a polished presentation, and a quiet sense of anticipation. I pictured finally getting official recognition, ownership terms, a roadmap for commercialization, maybe even equity. Because part of me still believed Derek was a man of his word, but the moment I stepped into the room, I knew I was wrong. Derek was already seated, quiet, next to Miranda Chase, Helix Fort's in-house counsel. In front of me wasn't a contract draft or investor packet. It was a thick document, already printed, pushed silently across the table. "Take a seat, Nathan," Derek said. His voice, flat, cold, held none of the fire it once did. I opened the folder. They cited Clause 13.2 of the employment contract. All intellectual property developed during the period of employment at Helix Fort is the property of the company. I looked up, keeping my voice calm. Aegis Core was something I started developing 2 years before I even met you. I have dated drafts, concept copyrights from my Zurich Institute days. Miranda cut in. Tone clinical. Ideas are common. What you've presented is a completed system, developed while employed at Helix Fort, using Helix Fort's resources. This time, Derek dropped the charm altogether. Aegis Core belongs to Helix Fort. The board has approved a bonus, $250,000. We believe that's more than fair. I stared at him. So, you're firing me? Miranda answered for him. Technically, we're transitioning your role, effective immediately. I gave a small, dry smile. Transitioning my role? You mean kicking me out of the thing I built from scratch? She said nothing, just slid over another sheet of paper. This is a one-time payout agreement with a confidentiality clause. If you sign, the funds will be transferred within 7 business days. Derek chimed in again, his tone now that of a teacher soothing a stubborn student. Nathan, let's not make this difficult. You did great work, but the company has to think bigger, beyond any one individual. I let out a quiet laugh. Bigger means cutting out the creator and claiming everything? Derek exhaled, a hint of frustration leaking through. I gave you the opportunity, the funding, the team. You brought a sketch. Turning it into a reality, that was Helix Fort's doing. I thought back to that night in April when the office had emptied out, but I stayed alone in the lab, wrestling with a logic flaw that made Aegis Core confuse anomalies with actual threats. There was no overtime, no deadline. I stayed because I believed in what I was building. And now the man who couldn't write a single line of code was telling me that work belonged to the company? I didn't get angry, I just nodded slowly. I understand the clause. I also understand the law. I skimmed the document, then closed it. No table slamming, no dramatic monologue. Maybe you expect me to threaten legal action, go to the press, raise hell, I said, but I won't. I stood up, buttoned my jacket. Not to look professional, but to remind myself this wasn't failure. It was just the opening move of a new game. Thanks for the money. I glanced at Miranda. And the clarity. Then I turned to Derek, looked him straight in the eye. If I were you, I'd double-check the source code before tomorrow's investor demo. Derek's brow arched slightly, his gaze sharpened. Is that a threat? I gave him a polite smile, almost warm. No, just a heads up. I returned the company laptop calmly, by the book. Security walked me all the way back to my office as if I might be hiding an AI virus in my backpack. I packed my things, just an old watch, a few worn-out notebooks, and a framed photo of the original AI team, back when I still believed I'd found a place to call home. One of the guards, the taller one, Eli, murmured as I sealed the box, "Shame. You were the best engineer we had." I turned to him and smiled. Not bitter, not grateful, just a quiet reply. Some things can't be stolen by contract clauses. And that was the truth. What they didn't know was that buried inside the demo deck for Aegis Core, the one they were planning to present to investors tomorrow morning, was a single line of code, not destructive, not malicious. No data would be erased, no system tampered with. That line had one job, to trigger the core directive I had written on day one. Aegis Core must identify every threat, no matter where it comes from, outside or inside the system. And that line would begin executing exactly 10 minutes after the demo started. I didn't write it out of revenge, I wrote it out of protection. 6 months ago, I detected an unauthorized access attempt on a private server, the one I used to test behavioral algorithms in isolation. At first, I assumed it was a bug, but then I noticed the timing. It coincided with the exact period Derek started taking a curious interest in my progress, not through technical questions, but things like, if you had to take a week off, would the team still be able to continue? Or, you should just focus on the AI stuff. Leave the documentation and internal paperwork to me. I knew his type. They don't steal with force, they steal with signatures. And I had no intention of letting Aegis Core become the victim of a misused signature. As I walked out of the building, I paused in the lobby, glancing up at the company logo etched across the glass wall. There was a time I stood proudly under that sign, like the day Aegis Core first flagged a high-level phishing variant our security team had completely missed. Back then, Derek clapped me on the back in front of the whole team and said, "This is the future of Helix Fort." Now I understood. He wasn't lying. He just forgot that the future doesn't belong to someone who isn't worthy of leading it. I stepped outside. The breeze was light. The box in my hands weighed barely 6 pounds, but I carried it like it held a message, that I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with the only thing that mattered. I was still the only one Aegis Core listened to. At 9:18 p.m., my phone rang. Rachel, Derek's assistant. No greeting, no small talk. He wants to see you immediately. I glanced at the screen, then at the kitchen clock. I was eating instant noodles, rewatching an old episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Demo go well? I asked, not even pretending to sound surprised. She hesitated for a few seconds. A car is on its way. No explanation. I turned off the TV, tossed the noodle cup in the trash, and threw on a clean shirt. It hadn't even been 10 hours since I left Helix Fort, and Derek was already calling, like a man who just realized the mine he planted under his own feet was very real. I walked into the conference room just before 10. Helix Fort headquarters didn't look like a cutting-edge startup anymore. It looked like an ER waiting for triage. Lights all on, but not a sound. No engineers, no clicking keyboards, no tech chatter. Just Derek, sitting alone. Wrinkled shirt, crooked tie, red eyes, and hair that looked like he'd been clawing at it for hours. He didn't bother with a greeting. He exploded. "What the hell did you do to the system?" I didn't answer right away. Just calmly pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, like I was ordering a coffee. "You'll need to be more specific." "Specific?" He slammed a hand on the table. "That system, Aegis Core, set off an automatic lockdown. It flagged Helix Fort's own internal network as a threat. It sent over 7,000 alerts in 15 minutes, false flags, system errors, report discrepancies. The entire demo got derailed. Investors panicked." I nodded slowly, like I was reviewing standard test results. Maybe Aegis Core is doing exactly what it's supposed to, detecting threats, protecting itself. Derek's eyes flared. "Cut the crap. You sabotaged it." I tilted my head. "I was terminated yesterday. No device, no access, no credentials. Do you have any proof I did anything?" His fists clenched. "You're the only one who understands it that deeply." "Exactly." I gave a dry smile, which is why I know it's not broken. Derek shot to his feet and started pacing, like a caged animal, his voice now a strange mix of begging and rage. "It's labeling internal systems as ethical risk factors. It's generating non-stop reports, unstoppable. It's attacking Helix Fort itself." I crossed my arms. "Not attacking, identifying." "What?" "Aegis Core isn't destroying anything. It's doing exactly what I programmed it to do, evaluating the entire system, including threats from inside, period." Derek froze, and for a brief second I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. You taught it to monitor us?" I shook my head. "No. I taught it to detect abnormal behavior, no matter where it comes from." He swallowed hard, not taking his eyes off me. "You programmed it to turn on the company?" "I programmed it to protect the system, even if the threat is called executive misconduct. I've seen startups collapse because of internal budget fraud. I wasn't going to let that happen here, not when I was the one held accountable for the tech." Derek dropped into his chair, like something had drained the last bit of strength out of him. His hands trembled. "God damn it, Nathan, if those reports get out, then what?" I cut him off, voice low now, almost a whisper. "Investors will realize they were about to pour millions into a company that couldn't even pass its own audit system. Or they'll wonder why the AI labeled the CEO as the highest tier ethical risk." He didn't answer. His face had gone pale. For a moment, the room fell completely silent. Outside, wind rattled the glass panes, reminding us the night was still moving forward, and the price of betrayal had just been posted, not by a court, but by the cold, impartial logic of an AI he no longer controlled. I remember that moment vividly. It was August, close to midnight, when I got the alert from the internal surveillance system. Someone had tried to access the unreleased development branch of Aegis Core. I didn't raise an alarm, didn't notify security, didn't call an emergency meeting. I just stayed at my desk alone until 3 a.m., rewriting the authentication scripts and layering in hidden tracking protocols. I didn't know who had done it, but I knew one thing for certain. Whoever it was, they would try again. And Aegis Core needed to recognize it before it became a real threat. You, Derek swallowed hard, voice rasping, you're threatening me. No, Derek, I said quietly. I don't need to threaten you. Aegis Core already did it for me. He slumped in his chair, rubbed his face with both hands, like a man waking from a dream, only to realize the dream never belonged to him in the first place. I didn't know. I didn't think it would react like that. That's because you never truly understood it, I said bluntly. Aegis Core isn't a tool. It's a reasoning defense system. It doesn't just follow commands, it evaluates intent. And when it detects access without justification, without clearance, paired with opaque behavior, it flags it automatically. And you programmed it to act without asking for permission? Derek's voice was lower now. No anger, just panic. Not without permission, I shrugged, without waiting for your approval to do what's right. A long silence followed. Derek looked at me, then slowly turned his eyes toward the dark monitor at the end of the table. Maybe he was imagining the investors scrolling through those reports. Time-stamped logs, unauthorized access trails, emotionless annotations that cut like scalpels, all generated and archived by Aegis Core. I stood and walked over to the wall-mounted touchscreen. You remember when I once told you that Aegis Core was the future of cyber defense? I glanced back at him. Looking at it now, I think I was being too modest. Derek turned toward me slowly, and in that look everything had changed. No arrogance, no control. Just one question hanging in the air between us. Was there any way to escape the thing he once tried to steal? What do you want? Derek's voice was hoarse, like each word scraped its way out of his throat. He wasn't trying to act tough anymore, but he still couldn't bring himself to admit defeat. I didn't hesitate. 50% ownership of Aegis Core, official recognition as co-founder, a seat on the board, just to oversee ethical operations, and $8 million in restitution for attempted misappropriation. Derek let out a short, brittle laugh, more of a cough than an actual reaction. This is extortion, he muttered, lips twitching. I smiled, not smugly, not coldly, just like a man who had laid out a fair and rational offer. Extortion would be if I sent all 32 internal Aegis Core reports to your investors. Some of them wouldn't just lose money, they'd lose their seats. But this? I tilted my head. This is a negotiation. Derek didn't move. For the first time since I met him, since that pitch meeting in Austin, I saw him speechless. No spin, no forced grin, just fear draining the ability to respond. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out a USB drive, placing it quietly on the table between us. No theatrics, no emphasis. That contains the validation patch, I said. If you want tomorrow's demo to run like nothing ever happened, all you have to do is accept my terms. The patch will restore the verification chain, disable the alerts, and stop the internal ethics reports from generating. Derek didn't reach for it. He just stared at the USB like it might explode. Then his eyes flicked up, changing from fear to something else, suspicion. And if I refuse? His tone had shifted, no longer shaking, just low, laced with veiled threat. Then I won't do a thing, I said with a shrug. I don't have to. I leaned in slightly, eyes steady on his. As long as no one can override Aegis Core, tomorrow's demo collapses. The investors will start asking questions. When they don't get answers, they'll start looking for reasons. And when they look for reasons, they'll uncover everything. Derek recoiled slightly, like he'd been punched in the chest. He didn't speak, but I could see it in his eyes. That frantic inner calculation, scanning for a way out that didn't exist. I leaned back, softening my voice. I'm not trying to destroy you, Derek. I'm not here to burn this company down, but I'm also not someone you get to discard, buy out, or forget like some bug in the system. His jaw tightened. You planned this all along. I shook my head. No, I hoped I'd never have to. But 6 months ago, when I caught you snooping around my dev server, I knew this day might come. Derek let out a long, tired sigh, like a man who had just seen the consequences of his own ambition, refracted through the lens of a machine that no longer obeyed him. You built a system that could flag me as a threat. No, I corrected gently, voice even. I built a system that was honest enough not to care about job titles. Silence settled again, heavier than any argument. Finally, Derek reached out, slow, reluctant, and picked up the USB. Like it was still warm from the hand of the man across from him. His voice came out in a hush. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the investors will be here. Then by 10 a.m., everything will run as expected. I stood up and gave a small nod. Before I walked out, I looked back one last time. If we finalize the deal in time, those internal reports won't need to see daylight. And then I walked away, leaving behind a CEO who once believed he had everything under control, now clinging to a sliver of hope held inside a USB stick, and the mercy of the man he tried to erase. That morning, the Helix Fort lobby was more crowded than usual. Behind the front desk, a row of display screens flashed. Private investor briefing. But no one was looking at the screens. They were looking at me. I walked in, this time, without a cardboard box in my hands or resignation in my eyes. I walked in as the co-founder and the new chief technology officer of Helix Fort. Derek stood beside me, shoulders slightly drawn inward. His suit was still perfectly pressed, his shoes still polished, but his expression had changed. The smile on his face was tight, almost glued in place. The kind of smile people wear when they've run out of options and have no choice but to swallow their pride. Are you ready? One of the investors asked. Derek nodded. Yes, Nathan will be leading the technical presentation. We entered the conference room. Overhead lights beamed bright white. The long glass table was prepped with mineral water, neatly bound briefing packets, and a full set of projection equipment. I stepped up to the touchscreen display and launched the demo. Within minutes, every eye in the room was fixed forward. Aegis Core ran through attack scenarios. From complex DDoS waves to next-gen phishing vectors, even zero-day exploits with no existing signature. Not a second of lag. Not a single logic error. It didn't just defend, it anticipated. It acted before threats had the chance to take shape. And with each flawless response, I saw the investors' expression shift from skepticism to curiosity to admiration. One of them, an older man with silver hair and round glasses representing a top-tier tech fund, leaned forward. May I ask, what inspired you to develop something this advanced? Derek hesitated. I heard the faint breath he drew through his nose. His left hand tightened slightly around the pen resting in front of him. Then slowly, like each word had to be chiseled from the remains of a wounded ego, he answered, It all started with Nathan. The idea was his. Helix Fort just provided the tools. I gave a small nod. No chest thumping, no smug grin. Just stepped forward and let action speak as thanks. I walked them through the architecture of Aegis Core, layered machine learning, autonomous adaptation in untrusted environments, and how it dynamically rebuilt its defense grid, all without relying on any central database. The room was silent with focus. Then my phone buzzed quietly. I glanced down at the screen. Aegis Core, validation restored, threat neutralized, defense activated. I didn't smile, but inside, a feeling stirred, hard to name, not pride, not vindication. It was the feeling of standing before a door that once shut you out, now open from the inside, and you're the one holding the key. I looked up and continued the presentation. The next question came from a younger investor, likely from a growth fund in Silicon Valley. Last question, he said. Helix Fort has built something extraordinary, but what guarantees it won't be abused? I didn't look at Derek. I kept my gaze on the person asking and answered clearly, firmly, because this time, the person running the system is someone it once tried to shut out and survived. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was the kind born of recognition. 3 months later, Aegis Core intercepted a supply chain attack aimed at Gilmore and Price, an international banking institution. The attack was so complex that their internal cybersecurity team took nearly 12 hours just to understand how it was structured. Aegis Core detected, neutralized, and mapped the entire malware path in 6.4 seconds. The breach not only saved over $270 million in pending transactions, it turned Aegis Core into the most talked about name in commercial cybersecurity. We were recognized on global tech forums not because of our company's logo, but because of the principle behind the design. Protecting a system isn't just about technology, it's about the ethics of the person operating it. Derek and I maintained a working relationship, no longer cold but never close again. Between us was an unspoken boundary, shaped by what had happened and by something we both understood. Not everyone can stay friends with the person who once kept their hand from pressing the self-destruct key. I never sought revenge. I never brought up the past, but every time someone asked, "Why doesn't Aegis Core have an emergency override for the executive team?" and swing, I'd simply smile. Because sometimes, I'd reply, the most dangerous intruder wears a CEO badge. I wasn't joking. That line once made an investor nearly choke on his coffee, but they understood. In a world where power can corrupt faster than a single line of code, no system should ever be at the mercy of a job title. At Helix Fort's IPO ceremony, when the company crossed a $3 billion valuation, I stood quietly off to the side. No speech, no screen time. I let Derek handle that. He'd always been better at public speaking. I was there for one reason only, to ensure every line of data was properly encrypted and every back door was sealed shut. After the presentation, a young engineer, maybe 24 or 25, approached me. His face lit up like someone meeting a childhood hero. "I've been following Aegis Core since its early days," he said. "But what I really want to know isn't how you wrote the code. It's why you designed it to defend from within. What made you believe the threat could come from inside?" I looked at him for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever been doubted by your own team? Or had your work stolen by someone else?" He nodded gently, eyes lowering. I didn't say much, just placed a hand on his shoulder. Not every line of code matters. What matters is that the person writing it understands this. Security isn't just about data. It's about trust. And where power exists, trust is always the first thing to be tested. I turned to leave, but he called out after me, "Do you think Aegis Core could ever be abused?" I stopped, glanced back. Not as long as I'm still here. That night I stayed late. Before shutting off the office lights, I opened Aegis Core's system dashboard. In the corner of the screen, a quiet message appeared. System integrity secured, threat neutralized, creator verification active. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Not everyone will understand what it feels like to be pushed out of your own creation, to nearly lose everything, and then to return and sit in the very seat they once said you didn't deserve. But I didn't need everyone to understand. I just needed one thing: that no one could control what I had built except me. 2 weeks after the IPO, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It contained a single line. "Do you still have that Code of Ethics for Machine Autonomy document you gave me last year?" It was from Derek Sloan. The document he was referring to was one I had printed and placed on his desk during a strategic planning meeting last year. Bold, italicized heading on the first page. The stronger a system becomes, the more it must be guided by the right values. Back then, he didn't even open it. But now, it seemed something had changed. A few weeks later, I learned Derek had quietly established an internal AI ethics fund, donating 5% of his Helix Fort equity to support transparency-driven tech initiatives, overseen by an independent engineering board. No boardroom ties, no PR spin, no press release. But I knew that was how he chose to correct what he'd once broken. And to me, that meant more than any public apology ever could. Looking back, I realized if I had responded with anger, lawsuits, or sabotage, I might have won in the short term. But I would have lost the most important thing: the right to own the values I stood for. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from quiet preparation, from holding the line when you're hurt, and from trusting that the right thing will prove itself, as long as you never let go.